Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster and here's what's coming up over the next hour. So tonight, live at 7 p.m, GB News will host the Manchester hustings, where Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss will go head-to-head as the Conservative leadership race draws to a close. We will be in Manchester previewing this throughout the show. And I will be speaking with Conservative MP Chris Green, who is backing Liz Truss for leader, about what he makes of the contest so far. And it's been 1 year since Kabul fell to the Taliban. We'll be speaking to a former soldier who served in Afghanistan to ask what the situation is like there at the moment. And of course, give me your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @gbnews. But first, here's the news with Bethany.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's 1 minute past 3. I'm Bethany Elsey, here to bring you up to date from the GB newsroom. NHS leaders are warning the UK faces a humanitarian crisis this winter unless further action is taken to tackle rising energy bills. In a letter to the government, the NHS Confederation says people will have to choose between skipping meals to heat their homes or living in cold, damp conditions. It warns this could lead to an increase in annual deaths and create further pressure on the health service. The government has promised £400 of support for millions of households, but won't do anything further until the new Prime Minister is in office. Commuters in London are facing travel disruption again today as public transport workers strike in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. The advice is to avoid the tube, which will have little or no services running. Most buses across West and South West London are also cancelled. Mainline services across the UK have been affected too due to yesterday's strike, and there's further action planned for tomorrow. Transport Secretary Grant Shapps claims union bosses are getting in the way of a deal.
I think the simple answer to this would be for the union bosses to actually put the deal that's on the table, which is an 8% pay rise over 2 years, no compulsory redundancies, for example, on Network Rail, and put that to their membership. And I think if they did that, the membership may well accept it. If that doesn't happen, plan B, if you like, is we're going to make sure that we actually get on with these very, very important modernisations, which are holding our railway back.
Well, Labour's Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, says it's the government that's hindering negotiations.
What I'd say to the RMT is the primary motivator for you going on strike today is your concerns about conditions the government may attach to a funding deal with a TfL. We're on the same side here. Nobody wants the government to be touching unreasonable conditions to our deal. The only reason we need a deal is because of the pandemic. Let's work together with businesses, with other Londoners, to get the best possible deal for London. Today, it's ordinary Londoners, it's commuters, it's businesses who are caught in the crossfire. The government, Grant Shapps, isn't affected at all.
Cineworld shares have plummeted after reports the cinema chain is preparing to file for bankruptcy within weeks. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the world's second biggest cinema business has hired lawyers from Kirkland & Ellis and Alex Partners to advise on the process. Cineworld has declined to comment. A 44-year-old man has appeared at Willesden Magistrates Court charged with the murder of 87-year-old Thomas O'Halloran. Lee Byer is accused of stabbing Mr O'Halloran to death while he was riding his mobility scooter in the town of Greenford on Tuesday. The elderly man was pronounced dead at the scene. Mr Byer was remanded in custody and will appear at the Old Bailey later this month. A man has been arrested following the abduction and sexual assault of a 6-year-old girl in Greater Manchester. The 23-year-old remains in custody for questioning. Police say the girl was attacked in the Droylsden area on Wednesday. She's now back with her family. And a man who killed his wife on their wedding night and put her body into a suitcase has been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Thomas Nutt killed his partner, Dawn Walker, and dumped the suitcase in bushes behind their home near Halifax in West Yorkshire last year. Miss Walker's body was found 4 days later. Extremely hot and dry conditions in Europe are causing wildfires to sweep across parts of the continent. In Spain, more than 400 firefighters and 36 aircraft are tackling a blaze in Valencia, which has ravaged 19,000 hectares. The fire has been burning for days. It was dampened by rain on Wednesday, but raged again overnight by strong winds. Over 1,000 people have been forced to evacuate their homes. And COVID-19 infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level for 2 months. The ONS says 1.7 million people had the virus in the first week of August, a 34% drop from the last week of July. The number of patients in hospital with COVID is also continuing to drop, but experts warn figures could rise again in the autumn and winter. And from Monday, those with COVID-19 symptoms will no longer be advised to take a lateral flow test. You're watching GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now let's get back to the briefing with Arlene.
Welcome to the programme. It's just coming up to 6 minutes past 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, the race for number 10 still drags on, and tonight GB News will be hosting an exclusive Conservative Party hustings in Manchester. Liz Truss leads Rishi Sunak in almost every poll, but will tonight change anyone's mind? Well, let's cross over to Manchester and get the latest from GB News political correspondent Tom Harwood. Tom.
Yes, Arlene, preparations are well underway here in central Manchester. We've seen the seats being laid down, the screens being hoisted up, and indeed lots of preparation work, multiple cameras and microphones being tested. This is going to be a pretty seismic event at a fairly crucial point in this leadership race. Just a couple of weeks to go until the end of this contest, so every vote really counts now. We know that there are tens of thousands of Conservative members who have yet to vote. Could this be the crucial event that swings their vote, that changes or indeed forms their opinions? Well, I'm delighted to be joined by the maestro, the man who will be hosting this evening's event. Alistair Stewart is here with me. And Alistair, what are you expecting from the leadership contenders this evening?
Well, I think it really speaks volumes to what you've just said, and that is that people out there, particularly Conservative Party members, and they're the only people, whether you like that or not, that matter at this juncture, have heard so much about how you help folk through the energy crisis, what your view is on getting Brexit done and clearing the statute book and this, that and the other. And there are a few areas left where you can still put a postage stamp between them, and those are the areas that I think we'll be focusing on. But for me, and you and I talked about this yesterday at some length, I really want to know what they both think being a Conservative in the 21st century means post-Boris Johnson. We've all lived through moments like that, whether it was, are you a Heathite or a Thatcherite, whether you're a Cameroonian or whether you're not a Cameroonian. We're now at one of those tipping point moments. Johnson's gone. A lot of people in this room will be not happy about that. We know that from all of the data. So how are they going to build bridges between the party in Parliament and the party in the country? So on that basis, I think the big picture will be the stuff that yields the really fascinating, defining answers.
Really interesting. Such a moment in this country's history, a real juncture, potentially the most ideological Prime Minister, whoever of these two wins the leadership, potentially the most ideological Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher of any party.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And the ideology is always the case, is defined by the economics of it. And you've got the coincidence of terrifying borrowing numbers. You've got the coincidence of the economic impact of the coronavirus, and front page of the Telegraph is well worth reading. Anyone who's not seen that. Life and death stuff, as well as the economics of it. Industry trying to climb its way out. Slight improvement in the retail trade figures. But everything that these two people say about what government's role is, whether it's cutting taxes and keeping your fingers crossed for growth, or whether it's borrowing even more and bunging more money at people trying to get through the crisis. That's ideological. That's about what these two people believe in, but it's also what the role of the state is. It's how the government relates to the economy, even the size of the government. In the old days, there used to be really vibrant debates about whether government should take more than 35, 36% of gross domestic product, everything that makes the UK economy what it is. We're now up to 50%. And Sunak, fascinatingly, is on record as saying this must not be the new post-COVID norm. And I want to probe him on that, and I want to find out what the Trust view of that is as well. It's a really important yardstick that over the last 15, 20 years people have forgotten about.
Absolutely, and I suppose once you pin them on the ideology, policy flows from that, and you can almost use it as a yardstick to guess and to make educated assumptions as to what sort of policy they'll be pursuing. Yeah. But I suppose the other thing today is that we are quite late in the game in this contest. We've seen some fairly scrappy battling in recent days, some pretty harsh words said by each candidate about one another. Are you expecting tonight to potentially be the scrappiest yet?
No, I don't. I think it's going to be the scrappiest. There's a pretty fierce competition. And again, I always like to plug people whose writing I particularly admire. And Katie Balls has done a brilliant essay in The Times. She normally gets her stuff in The Spectator, but it's worth looking at her stuff in The Times about how both of them have evolved as candidates and how they've refined their game and got better at these hustings, got better at these debates. And I found that quite interesting. I think they both know that they've got to the point in the end game. He has got a lot to do if the numbers are accurate. She has got to hang on to it. The great Sir John Curtis says this morning in the newspapers, it's hers unless she makes a profound blunder. Profound blunders happen to all sorts of people and can suddenly change the runners and riders. And that's happened in the past in Tory leadership campaigns. And if I just mention the names Gove and Johnson, people listening will know exactly what I'm talking about. It's happened before. But I think they now know that they're at that stage of the battle where tonight is about content, belief, ideology, as you put it yourself a moment ago, philosophy. What makes me, Liz Truss, me, Rishi Sunak, tick? And what would I be like if I did occupy Downing Street for the next 2 years running up to the general election? Absolutely intriguing. Not a time for histrionics, certainly not a time for silly behaviour. So I don't think we'll have any of that.
Well, Alistair Stewart, thank you so much for talking us through exactly what's going on this evening there, because it really is getting to be that almost final moment in this campaign as people send off their ballots. We know that there are postal strikes coming next week. Conservatives encouraged to vote sooner rather than later now. This could be the last big moment in this campaign in terms of the membership of the Conservative Party and how they'll cast their votes.
Tom, thank you very much, and thanks to the wonderful Alistair as well. We're all looking forward to tonight in Manchester, and I thought the point about the evolution of the candidates over this past number of weeks was a fascinating one and gives us lots to think about. But now let's go back to the Northwest and talk to GB News Northwest reporter Sophie Reaper. Sophie, good to see you. And what's the mood in Manchester that you're picking up at the present moment in time?
Well, as Tom said, we're well underway with the preparations for tonight's leadership hustings, where we're going to see Liz Truss take on Rishi Sunak to prove to the people of Manchester and the North West as a whole why they deserve to be the next Prime Minister of the UK. And I've been asking the people of Manchester who they think the best candidate would be for the job and some of the key issues they believe need tackling.
Helping people with low income and putting some money something on for them.
I think that they should be looking to do something about the energy bill crisis that we've got going on. The cost of living is just going to spiral out of control. I think people are already struggling.
I don't care whoever it is, as long as they, do something. Action is more, speaks louder than words.
Tories need to be out, but also Keir Starmer needs to not be pretending to be Labour when he's absolutely not. We need to stop trying to privatise everything.
I don't think Sunak comes from a working class background. He doesn't know what it's like to live a standard life.
Make it better, take care of the people. more recreation and the children and the streets, homeless people, help homeless people.
It's Labour, it's got to be. This is a working city. Everybody works, everybody struggles, but ain't no one helping Manchester out.
The new Prime Minister needs to focus on the levelling up of the UK. I think the public transport up here is shocking compared to London. They keep on saying that they're going to do more to help Manchester, but they're really not.
The one that's probably going to do the better job is probably Rishi Sunak. However, I wouldn't necessarily prefer Rishi Sunak. I'm not sure I trust him.
A lot of people are struggling. They are well dressed with a gold chain, but mentally they are going through a lot. And I don't think government is doing enough.
If I was Prime Minister for the day, the first thing I would do, I'd get them all in and I'd say, right, there's no more expenses being paid and I want you to take a pay cut. And whoever was left, they're the true ones, aren't they? They're the ones that'll help you lead the country. We want a strong person.
And that's neither of them?
No. They've got no bottle, darling.
Better wages, better schemes for single parents.
Increase the minimum wage to help the people that are really struggling, which is lots. I work in a hospital and we've got nurses that are using food banks. Should never be happening.
Tax cuts is a load of nonsense because at the end of the day, we're a society.
So as we've just heard, there are a lot of issues that the people of Manchester want tackling, whether that's the cost of living crisis, transportation or levelling up here in the north. So whichever of the two candidates are successful, there's plenty for them to be sinking their teeth into.
Sophie, thank you so much for bringing us the views from the northwest. There's our reporter Sophie in Manchester, where of course tonight there is the hustings happening here live on GB News at 7 o'clock. Well, one thing whoever becomes Prime Minister will need to come to terms with, of course, is Northern Ireland and that protocol. Let's bring in GB News correspondent Dougie Beattie to talk about all of this. Dougie, we had the two candidates over in Belfast on Wednesday of this week. Tell us how that went down.
Well, as it's been said the rest of the way around the UK, this is Tory on Tory, and really each region, it's about the priorities. The Conservative Party don't have any MLAs here, they don't have any councillors or even MPs, so it was very much about the priority that each one of them have. Now, the protocol is causing, as we have discussed so many times, many problems inside Northern Ireland, and it's mainly in and around cost, and it's around triangulation. Goods, raw materials leaving here, travelling to the mainland, coming back in, and it's getting them back in is the problem. So supply and demand becomes an issue. Now, both Sunak and Truss said that they were totally behind the bill that is passing through the House of Commons and House of Lords at this moment in time. They went out of their way to stress that it was legal and it was legally binding and that they would stand by it. Even Liz Truss going further to say that she would stand by it so much that she would put it up to America, that she would stand tight against the EU and Dublin. So really battling for those votes in amongst the Tory party inside the regions. But there was other things as well. In Northern Ireland we have a massive public sector, publicly funded bodies here, lots of quangos as well as the civil service, roughly balancing up to about 70% of the economy. And of course both these leaders are about shrinking the state. They're about bringing that down and bringing the costs of government down, and Northern Ireland may be right in the firing line of that because there is so much fat here to be trimmed at this minute.
Both Truss and Sunak were talking about the protocol, not very much between them, some people may say, but it is fair to say that Liz Truss was very specific in relation to the European Court. She said it shouldn't have primacy in relation to Northern Ireland or indeed the UK internal market either, that should be restored under the protocol bill. Do you think that the membership in Northern Ireland accepts that there's very little between the two of them on the protocol, or do they think that Truss is stronger on the protocol?
From what I was talking to them before it and some of them after it, and I do get the distinct impression that they trust more on this than they do Sunak. I think they pretty much think that they may be sold a little in and around negotiation of that if it comes down to it. But, you know, how they voted on the day, we will never know. But I do think that Trust probably shaded it here in Northern Ireland, and I think that protocol, only 30% of it is currently in Northern Ireland. It is having an effect of the cost of living here, very much so actually, and it will actually bite far, far further in when the other 70% of it comes in. But of course the other side of that is, you know, we were told that Article 16 was at their fingertips and nobody used it. They threatened it lots. So this legislation that's going through the House is also the same. It is only legislation to use. It's not to actually put it in place. It's almost a threat to the EU.
Yes, indeed, it's just enabling legislation, and time will tell whether it'll be used, Dougie. So thanks very much for bringing us up to date from what looks like a sunny Stormont this afternoon, and I'll speak to you soon. Coming up, I'll be speaking with Chris Green MP on why he is backing Liz Truss. But before that, let's take a short break.
There's just 2 weeks left of voting in the battle to become Britain's next Prime Minister. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak have been dashing around the country, and tonight they make their pitches to Conservative voters in the heart of Labour-run Manchester. But do either of them have what it takes to defend and maintain Boris Johnson's mighty majority? GB News is proud to be hosting the Conservative hustings in Manchester, live and exclusive from 7 p.m. GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh, my goodness me.
And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News. Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable, and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Welcome back to the briefing with me, Arlene Foster. Well, the leadership race continues with recent inflation figures posing difficult questions for the two candidates' tax plans. Former Health Secretary Matt Hancock, who is backing Rishi Sunak for leader, spoke to GB News earlier today.
I think talking to party members, the contest is wide open. If you look at the polling, you could take that with a pinch of salt. It's very hard to poll Conservative Party members. And in fact, the latest polls show that the gap is closing. So, that reflects my experience. Rishi at these hustings is going down very well. And you get more people supporting him on the way out than on the way in. So everybody's a member of the Conservative Party, needs a chance to vote. We've had a 6-week contest. And I think, Rishi is the man to tackle the sorts of problems that we heard from the people of Manchester just there. He's absolutely ready. Look, I sat next to him, worked very hard with him during the pandemic, which was an enormous crisis. And there he kept people in jobs. Everybody thought there was going to be a huge unemployment crisis. That's one crisis we don't have at the moment because of his furlough scheme. So, he's probably seen more experience than any other candidate standing to be Prime Minister. And that's testament to his experience and what he's done with it, which has been very radical in the past, to keep businesses going, to keep people in jobs. And now we need that same sort of approach, targeted support for people with energy bills, but also getting inflation down overall. Because without doing that, we're really stuffed.
Lots of former Health Secretary Matt Hancock there talking about who he supports in this campaign. But let's bring in Conservative MP Chris Green, Member of Parliament for Bolton West, who's backing Liz Truss. Well, you will have heard Matt Hancock saying there that the competition is wide open. Would you agree with that?
I think we can't assume where the members are on this at the moment. It is all to play for. I know there's a lot of speculation, there's a lot of polling to say that Liz Truss is clearly ahead. But in these races, whether it's a general election, whether it's a leadership for the Conservative Party, every vote really does count. And Liz Truss is out there campaigning for every single vote. But I think the thing you can measure, the thing you can objectively judge, is members of Parliament. They clearly, and by a significant majority over Rishi Sunak, are coming out in support of Liz Truss. That actually, I think, is a very strong guide to the membership supporting Liz Truss for Prime Minister.
And let's talk about your support for Liz Truss. What makes you support Liz Truss? Why do you think she'll be the best candidate to come forward, and why do you think she'll make a good Prime Minister?
Well, I think she's been very clear about the number one issue we're facing, and that's the cost of living crisis. There are a number of things that are built up during lockdown. There are a number of global issues as well, which requires decisive action. Liz Truss, in terms of reversing Rishi Sunak's national insurance increase, I think that's a good move in itself. Challenging the green levy on energy prices, that's a positive move. She's going to have an emergency budget days after. If she is chosen as leader, she'll have an emergency budget days afterwards to have the latest figure, the latest facts to make sure she's in a position to deal with that crisis. I know Liz Truss is someone who can deliver, and also she's got far more experience. As a new boy in 2015, as was Rishi Sunak, she was already in the cabinet at that stage. She has far more experience than so many other people in Parliament, so she can hit the ground running, dealing with all of the questions we face.
And tell me, Friday's usually a constituency day, and your constituents in Bolton West, what are they saying to you about what they want to see the new Prime Minister deliver?
I think it's that certainty. I was out in Bolton West this morning on the campaign trail, canvassing, talking to my constituents, and the cost of living crisis is that number one issue. So they are very concerned about what got us into this position in the first place, and they need to have that confidence that we can get out and get to the side. So they welcome the fact that Liz Truss has already set out a number of measures already, and that she's going to have that emergency budget to fix some of the problems that have been created in recent years. This is what they are focused upon, because they also, as a nurse actually highlighted to me, there are so many pressures on the health service that have been created very recently, and we need to get through to the other side. We need a strong economy to be able to pay for the National Health Service.
And Chris, just finally, I mean, obviously all leadership elections, when there are elections for the leadership, means that you have to take sides, means that they can be quite spiky at times. How do you see the party coming together after this, what has been quite a long and drawn-out process of people taking sides? How do you think you can come together after this election is over?
Well, I love politics, so I actually enjoyed almost every moment of the leadership race. It can't go on for long enough, but I do realise that the country as a whole doesn't quite see it that way. So I think fundamentally the fact that the majority of Conservative members of Parliament are backing Liz Truss, I'm hoping that the members will give that clear endorsement to Liz Truss to make sure that she has the support she needs, not only from MPs, but from members, to make sure that the whole of our party and all of our support knows that Liz Truss has that mandate. And actually, fundamentally, this isn't a divide like Leave or Remain. This is something where we all see the same problem, we all see the same challenges, and we need to unite behind the same leader.
Well, Chris Green, thank you so much for joining me live from Manchester, where, of course, tonight we'll have another Hustings live here on GB News with Alistair Stewart. But coming up next, we'll be discussing the awful scenes in Scotland before the Perth Hustings on Tuesday, where politicians and journalists were harassed by pro-independence demonstrators. But first, the latest headlines.
Arlene, thank you. Good afternoon. It's just past 3:30. I'm Bethany Elsey in the GB newsroom. More travel disruption continues as Transport for London workers strike in a long-running dispute over jobs and pensions. Commuters are being advised to avoid the tube, which has little or no services running. Most buses across West and South West London are also cancelled. Cineworld shares have plummeted after reports the cinema chain is preparing to file for bankruptcy within weeks. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the world's second biggest cinema business has hired lawyers from Kirkland Ellis and Alex Partners to advise on the process. Cineworld has declined to comment. A man who killed his wife on their wedding night and put her body into a suitcase has been given a life sentence with a minimum term of 21 years. Thomas Nutt killed his partner, Dawn Walker, and dumped the suitcase in bushes behind their home in Halifax last year. Miss Walker's body was found 4 days later. And COVID-19 infections in the UK have fallen to their lowest level for 2 months. The ONS says 1.7 million people had the virus in the first week of August. That's a 34% drop from the last week of July. The number of patients in hospital with COVID is also continuing to drop. And from Monday, those with COVID-19 symptoms will no longer be advised to take a lateral flow test. You're watching GB News on TV, online and DAB+ radio. We'll get back to the briefing in just a moment.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
And here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.182 and 1.176 euros. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,483.15 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. It's just gone 25 minutes to 4 in the afternoon. Well, on Tuesday night, the race for number 10 was taken to Scotland, where Conservative Party members got the chance to listen to their candidates. But unfortunately, there were terrible scenes there, and we're now going to speak to Brian Monteith about what happened on that event. Brian, thank you for joining me. Were you surprised by the toxicity and the aggression that you viewed on your television screen when you watched those hustings on Tuesday night?
In some respects, I was not surprised. This type of shouting, spitting, throwing eggs, abuse has been going on and building up. But this is probably, for most people, the first time they've really seen it in any large numbers and seen it being recorded. I used to attend these type of events in Perth myself back in the 80s and 90s, and it used to be just a ragbag of trots hurling abuse, and it didn't really make much difference. But it's quite clear there were about 1,000 people in Perth, and there didn't seem to be a single person there that didn't have something abusive to say. The placards that were on show, the banners, frankly, for most people, they'd be beyond the pale. And it's coming, this sort of experience is coming because of the language being used by senior nationalist politicians. And it's really, therefore, no surprise.
Yeah, and I mean, for those of us who have been involved in politics in places like Scotland and, in my case, Northern Ireland, we get used to catcalling, perhaps, on occasions. But it just seemed to me to be a different level of aggression, and particularly when I saw the attack on the BBC correspondent. I think he was a BBC correspondent, he was certainly a journalist. I thought that was just completely out of order, particularly when it was quite clearly going to be reported upon, but they didn't care.
Well, back in the 2014 referendum, this sort of thing did happen. For instance, when there was an interview with the BBC and Alex Salmond, and there was a reaction against the way Nick Robinson handled that, immediately there was calls for a demonstration, and a demonstration was had outside the BBC. When Jim Murphy, the Labour MP, was going around with his crate and standing on it and speaking in public, he was often abused. And many people can actually recount a number of examples about essentially what would be intimidation and bullying. It wasn't a pleasant experience. And what we're seeing now is the fact that as Nicola Sturgeon keeps leading nationalists to believe that they'll have a referendum only for her to fail to deliver it, they are getting more and more bad-tempered, I feel. And ultimately, I think there's going to be some serious assaults if they're not told to calm down, if they're not disciplined. We've already seen a Liberal Democrat councillor assaulted and the police took no action. And I think we're really looking for the police to step in, because it seems very odd to most normal people that you can be spat on. Now, spitting on someone I always thought was an assault. And we have police with cameras on their shoulders. We have CCTV. It was outside the concert hall. Don't tell me there's no CCTV there. It's a public space. Yet nothing was being done about it. And I think we really need the Scottish police to step in and actually bring some order to these demonstrations.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we've seen the police in various parts of the UK step in when people have said something online and they feel that there's a need to talk to them about that. But actually what you're speaking about is an actual assault through spitting. Yes. And it is an assault, I think it's fair to say. But do you believe, Brian, that the SNP has fuelled this rise in, if you like, aggression and toxicity in our politics? Because, I mean, civility seems to have gone out the window. Of course, you can have a political ideology, you can be a unionist, you can be a nationalist, but this sort of aggression seems to be rising again.
It is, and people might, for instance, point to Liz Truss and say, "Oh, but Liz Truss said Nicola Sturgeon was an attention seeker." Well, let me just say that actually that is part of the parley that goes on in politics, of people calling someone out for what they're saying, whether they're a hypocrite or not, whether they mean it. But when people criticise Liz Truss, they fail to recognise that previously, in the Scottish Parliament no less, Liz Truss had actually accused the Liberal Democrat leader of being a pathetic attention seeker. So my point is this: there is debate, and people troll each other. People try and get a reaction. But when it actually moves to intimidation, and that's what was going on the other night, then that is a different level. And the police, as I say, people are looking at them and they're seeing them doing calypso dancing, limbo dancing. They're dancing around all these events where they're meant to be fitting in with the community. What about doing their job? What about stepping in and pulling these people out for breach of the peace? I can't understand why it's not happening.
Yeah, and just finally, Brian, as a former Conservative MSP yourself, who do you think in the current leadership contest would be best for the Union, best for Scotland?
Well, to me, the Union is not just about Scotland. It's, you'll be pleased to know, definitely about the whole of the UK. And in that regard, for me, I don't have a vote, but it comes down to trust. Because one has to ask, if Rishi Sunak was so keen to prevent Article 16 of the protocol being triggered, then I feel he cannot be trusted in the sense of negotiating any new protocol for trade across the Irish Sea. My feeling is he would capitulate. I feel he's no leverage because the EU know that he would give in. Whereas with Liz Truss, I think there is a prospect, at least, that she understands better the actions that need to be taken. She's negotiated with them, probably come away learning something from that. And I think she'll be therefore more robust. So I tend to side with her.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. That's Brian Monteith, former Conservative MSP and indeed European Member of Parliament and now a columnist for The Scotsman. Thank you so much, Brian. Well, the rate of inflation has continued to rise this week, reaching a 40-year high of 10.1%. The Bank of England has forecast the rate could exceed 13%, and that's a long way from the target of 2%. There are many potential causes of this recent surge, including the war in Ukraine and the central bank responses to COVID-19 pandemic, and it will therefore require the correct response to bring it under control. Well, joining me now to discuss the spike of inflation and what could be done about it is the Executive Director of Europe Economics, Andrew Liliko. Andrew, thank you so much for joining me. I suppose, first of all, let's talk about the causes of inflation. Is it about the energy prices? Is it about the war in Ukraine? What exactly are the causes of this inflation, this huge rise?
Well, it's a combination of things. I mean, at the most fundamental level, at the end, when push comes to shove, inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. So the monetary authorities, the Bank of England, has to take ultimate responsibility. But it was very tricky for them because it's occurred in an environment in which there was always bound to be a bit of inflation off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic recovery phase. They kept the foot on the pedal for a bit too long in 2021, and a number of us criticised them for this at the time, said that they were likely to create some inflation, but there was always going to be some. And then they and the government more broadly just failed to see the implications as the energy prices rose. In fact, energy prices started rising well in advance of the Ukraine war. They were rising very rapidly last autumn, and that led to the bankruptcy of a number of energy retailers even then. But of course, we then have a lot of that coming through later. There's other things going on as well, continual disruption of international supply chains with COVID-related lockdowns in China and that kind of thing. But it's a complex number of factors, but ultimately, it's the monetary authorities' responsibility when inflation goes high.
And Andrew, given that some of this, at least some of it, is global and the pressures that come from that, what is it that a government can do to try and minimise the impact of inflation? I mean, is it, in your view, right to do this through handout to citizens, through benefits, or are there other ways that a government can deal with inflation?
Well, the first thing it needs to be doing is to be addressing the inflation itself. So interest rates need to be going up. We'll engage in a little bit of quantitative tightening. That's the reversal of some of the quantitative easing, the money printing that we did. Some of that will be important. But I think another really key thing is that the government needs to tell the private sector what inflation rate it's hoping to achieve. At the moment, we have a notional target of 2%, which nobody thinks that the government really wants the Bank of England to achieve. The Bank of England is saying inflation is going to 13%. How are businesses and workers supposed to know what sorts of pay rises to negotiate for the past couple of years? We can't expect, some people are saying that the workers shouldn't be trying to get pay rises, and that's ridiculous. You can't expect the workers to accept a 20% reduction in their real pay over 2 years. So their salaries are definitely going to be going up. But at the moment, it's anybody's guess what the policymakers really want as the level of inflation. And so it's very hard for the workers and the businesses to work out what sort of salary rises are the appropriate ones to grant. So the government needs to be much clearer in indicating what inflation rate it wants to achieve. When inflation targets were originally brought in, they were brought in as part of the process of managing inflation down. And what you did was you said, well, I want to have this inflation rate in this year, and this inflation rate the year after that, and this inflation rate the year after that, so as to give people a clear sense of where things are going. And the government has failed to do that. On the broader sense of what's going to happen to the economy, well, the reality is that the big rise in energy prices that we've seen, it maybe didn't have to turn as much into inflation as we saw it, but it was always going to affect the economy. Similarly, the business of having enormous debts run up over a few years because of COVID was always going to have an effect on the economy. And these things are not things that one can wish away. There's going to be pain, and it's just a question of how it's distributed across the economy and through time. I think it's a mistake to think that what you want to do when energy prices are very high is to take away that signal. When energy prices are high, the market is telling you, make more energy if you can, or gather more energy, and use less if you can. If you take that signal away and you say, well, what we're going to do is to prevent the prices rising and leave the consumers consuming just as much energy as they did before, you're going to run out. Because the reason the energy prices are high is not because of some sort of, corporate greed or something. It's just that there isn't enough energy. So the energy is being rationed by the price going up because everybody's bidding to try to get the small amount of energy there is in international markets. In some countries where they're being stricter about maintaining price caps, they're running out. So what they're going to do is end up rationing. In Germany, they're saying that if their businesses and households don't cut their usage by 20% by the winter, there's going to be rationing. There's talk of rationing in France as well. If we don't want to have rationing here, we need to let the price signals do the work. And we also, I think that the government should be doing absolutely everything it can at the moment to get any kind of energy generation going through the next few months. Now, it talks of its schemes of energy coming on in 5 years' time, and that's all very well, but it's not going to make any difference to the energy bills this winter. So what we should have been having it since last autumn. It's getting very late in the day now, but there should be an absolutely concerted effort. At the time of the COVID crisis, there was a concerted effort where the government coordinated with businesses to do a mass building of ventilators. You'll probably remember that, and your viewers will remember that. Why haven't we been doing a similar effort to get massive numbers of wind turbines on every house, or solar panels on every house, or wood-burning stoves in every garden, or anything, just to get energy? Energy bills of £5,000 a year for an average household, with the average household income post-tax in the UK is £31,400. £5,000 a year is an absolutely catastrophic rise in prices. And what that ought to lead to is increased pressure to make more energy and to use less. The other thing that we need to do is, of course, that poorer households are going to have absolutely no chance of paying for these kinds of energy bills. So their benefits are going to have to rise, and the benefits thresholds which they are on are going to have to rise. Some people say, well, what you should be doing is to be somehow paying benefits to everybody in the economy to shield them from the impacts of inflation. And that's the short road to economic ruin. You can't have an average household or rich. Nobody should be sending me any money to pay for my energy bills. We need to be having those who are not at the poorer end of the scale. You should be finding other ways to help the economy more generally. So the right way of doing that would be temporary tax cuts, that kind of thing, or perhaps some temporary reductions in national insurance contributions for businesses. So various sorts of measures to help the broader economy. Also, as I say, we need to have some better coordination of the process of salaries going up. It can't be for the government to be raising your income if inflation is high. If inflation is 10% for a couple of years, your employers are going to have to pay you extra salaries, and the government needs to coordinate that. Otherwise, people are going to make mistakes. What happened in the early 1980s, for example, was that people thought that the inflation was going to carry on going up when it got to 25. They thought it was going to go 30, 35, and they had a very high pay round in 1980. Which wasn't really recovered until 1987. They didn't get back to where they'd been in terms of real pay. And this led to more than 3 million people being unemployed for 51 months in a row because the salaries were just vastly too high. Yeah. That's the kind of thing that happens when you have high inflation. People, the workers and the businesses can make mistakes. And the government needs to be very careful here. We only have 3.8% unemployment, low unemployment at the moment, but we shouldn't be negligent about that. There could easily be a mistake, and we need to be very careful about coordinating these things, and I don't think the government is.
Andrew, thank you so much for your analysis, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again, unfortunately, about inflation for quite some time. Andrew Liliko there. Well, it has now been a year since NATO and its allies began their final withdrawal from Afghanistan after a conflict lasting nearly 20 years. The scenes of people scrambling onto planes will remain an image of history, just as the last helicopter fleeing the US Embassy in Saigon has become the lasting image of the Vietnam War. Well, joining me now to discuss his experience advising US Central Command is Major General Chip Chapman. Chip, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I did want to talk about Afghanistan today to mark that 1 year anniversary and those scenes of people trying to get out of Afghanistan. But of course, if we look at what's happening just this week, we've seen violence still happening in Kabul.
Well, that's right. And you would, I think. I think, firstly, we've got to remember that the strategic objective of withdrawing the NATO forces from Afghanistan has been shown to be correct in the last year. That is, the US strategic objective was always to prevent catastrophic attack on the mainland of US. And certainly from July 21, both the head of the CIA, Director Burns, and the head of the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, said Al-Qaeda and IS no longer have the capability to threaten the homeland. I think we've also seen that in the UK with only one attack of David Amos last year, and that was an inspired attack, not a centralized attack from Al-Qaeda or IS. So from a strategic security perspective, the decision to withdraw was correct. That is different than saying the human security aspects look terrible. And that is all those things to do with access to education, women's rights, and various freedoms, which are still in turmoil in Afghanistan and will be for some time, because one of the things we're seeing at the moment is the growing influence in the power structures of those who are very, very hard line is Akhundzade, the leader of the Taliban, and the Haqqani interior minister. And so you might well see things getting worse in Afghanistan in terms of an impending split between and within the Taliban, because they were never really a centralized organization in how they fought the war. Some were given orders by the Quetta Shura, others by the Peshawar Shura. They're now trying to centralize the state. That in itself creates frictions in the Pashtun honor code. So a very mixed picture from the security perspective. If you're in the West, it's great. If you're someone who's living in Afghanistan, it's terrible.
Yeah, and surely we should be concerned, given that we were there for 20 years, we should be concerned about what is actually happening in the country today. And perhaps if you can explain to our viewers and listeners the background to the sort of attacks that we've seen on Wednesday at a mosque in Kabul. Why is that continuing to happen?
Well, you've still got a large number of groups in Afghanistan, particularly ISK, that's the Islamic State Khorasan, the people who seek to do attacks through the Central Asia and Southern Asia. And that is really because of a major doctrinal difference between the Pashtun, the Taliban, who are Deobandi Hanafi strain of Islam, and the ISK, who really are sort of Salafist Wahhabis from the sort of Middle Eastern school. So one sees the other, IS sees the Taliban as apostates, they're not true Muslims, and therefore they're marked out for attack. And this is why we always got the Taliban wrong in terms of the Taliban were really Pashtun nationalists. They weren't global jihadists in the way that IS and Al-Qaeda are and were and are.
And I think that's fascinating, because when we're looking in from the UK into what's happening, we see them all as, the same, if I can put it like that, and it strikes me, coming from Northern Ireland, that often happens to us as well. And you served in Northern Ireland and you know what that is like. It is a case of us trying to explain to our listeners and viewers what the differences are, isn't that right?
Yeah, it is. And of course, it's a lot wider than that. So it is the countries which surround Afghanistan, which are even terrified of what the spillover might be from those groups that are there. So, for example, if you're China, you're worried about a group called the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, ETIM, and there was an attack in Kunduz in October from a guy who had the handle of a Uyghur, which terrified the Chinese. The Pakistanis have had a group called the TTP, Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, which have been attacking into Pakistan from Afghan territory. And one of the big splits in the last year has been really between the Taliban and Pakistan, who have had a number of airstrikes into Afghanistan. And partly that's to do with this fact that there is this increasing Taliban nationalism, particularly over the Durand Line. Now, the Durand Line is an ancient British, of course, inspired line which demarcates the border between Pakistan and Afghanistan. And there are a large number, millions of Pashtun who live on the Pakistan side of the border. Now, there was a peace conference set up recently to try and get the TTP, this Tehrik-i-Taliban Pakistan, to have a peace settlement with the Pakistanis, with a number of religious scholars from Pakistan coming. That failed. Meanwhile, the Taliban seem to have a rapprochement with the Indians and may indeed be sending some of the Taliban cadres to train alongside the Indian army in the future. So it's a sort of shape-shifting movement all the time in that part of the region amongst many of these jihadist groups. And when the American intelligence talk about the most dangerous transnational terrorist groups, it is those types of groups like the TTP and another one called the LET, Lashkar-e-Toiba.
I'm afraid we're out of time completely. I could talk about this whole afternoon, and I'm sure our viewers and listeners could listen as well. So thank you for joining me this afternoon. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. The show's back every Friday at 3 o'clock. And up next, it's Nana Akua. But first, I'll leave you with the weather.
Hi there, I'm Aidan McGibbon. Welcome to the latest weather forecast from the Met Office. Today's showers will ease in many spots overnight, with clear spells replacing them. But in the far northwest, the next area of wind and rain is approaching. It's currently sitting out in the Atlantic, but we're going to see for the rest of the day quite a showery westerly airflow, and with tighter isobars across Scotland, Northern Ireland and Northern England, a blustery breeze here as well. Now, for much of the country, clear spells break out overnight, with showers mostly easing away. But for Western Scotland, Northern Ireland as well, The cloud thickens and some heavy rain turns up after midnight, along with a strengthening wind. Gales around exposed western coasts. Temperatures are mostly staying at around 11 to 13 Celsius, but in some sheltered spots of northeast Scotland, central and eastern England, single figures are more likely as we start off Saturday. Plenty of sunshine in the south and south.